August 23rd, 2020, I got a headache. Now, that's not something too uncommon for most people, but at nearly 50 years old by then, I had had about 10 headaches in my life. It just wasn't something I dealt with, and I caused most of my headaches in the past. There are parts of my life that feel like they belong to somebody else. Scenes from a movie I never saw, pages from a book I don't remember reading. Late 2020 is like that. It's a chapter in my life I was never truly living in. Moments where the body kept going, the heart was beating, but the mind stepped out of the room. A blank stretch of time where my body stayed in the world, but I wasn't fully in it. A story I survived but didn't witness, a story that was written in medical notes, CAT scans, and the worried retelling of people who watched me slipping out of myself. The truth is simple and brutal. Most people don't survive a single brain bleed. I had 3 in 2020, and somehow I'm still here. I woke up in the middle of the night with this headache that just wouldn't go away. Tried some Tylenol and Advil and all that fun stuff, and nothing worked. So, against better judgment, I drove myself to the emergency room. It was about 18-minute drive. Couldn't get there quick enough. My body was just destroying itself from within at that time. I get into the waiting room, and there's, the triage nurse, and they check me in, and right away my vital signs were off the chart. My blood pressure was in the 200s. My heart rate was racing, and it was obvious I was in quite a bit of pain. So they brought me back right away. And I remember meeting a young emergency room doctor, and he came in and asked what brought me here. And I said, well, I have a headache, of all things, but I don't get headaches. And he looked at the vital signs, and he's like, yeah, there's something going on. We're not 100% sure yet, but we'd like to do a CAT scan. So they start an IV, they put me on some oxygen, and they schedule a CAT scan. Coincidentally, from the ER bed that I was at, it's just a short hallway out to the right, through a door to the left, and you're at the CAT scan area. So it wasn't even that long before I was being wheeled through the hospital hallways and came upon the CAT scan area. And I don't know, it felt like eternity in that machine. It was loud. But got out of there and was back into the emergency room bay probably within 10 minutes. I would say it was about 35 to 40 minutes later when a different doctor comes in. And she introduces herself. She says, my name is Dr. Wheel, and I'm a trauma surgeon here at the hospital. And these are my residents. And she had about 5 or 6 people with her. And she had a bit of a somber look on her face. She says, you have what's called the subdural hematoma. Essentially, you're bleeding within the brain, between the skull and the brain material. She said, we're going to get you some pain medicine, and try to get you upstairs right away because it's something that you don't, I guess you don't mess with. So I laid my head back down, and they gave me some sort of a medication that all I remember is I remember it still hurt, but I guess he didn't care anymore. I don't like medications like that. I would be, I'd be a terrible drug addict. I don't like that feeling that those kind of medications provide. So I get upstairs and get settled into the room, and I'm in a smaller hospital at this time, and they're going to keep me in for observation. And I know I just slept, probably 2 or 3 days, just slept. That was the only thing I could do to deal with the pain. They were coming in, I don't know, it felt like every 2 hours to draw blood, assess neurological conditions. I had to squeeze the nurse's hands, move my feet, point my toes up, point my toes down, respond to some basic commands. They did another CAT scan about 2 to 3 days later, and they decided to send me home. And I thought that was a bit of an odd thing. It started quietly. A thin line of blood began to pool along the side of my brain. A subdural hematoma, just 3.5 millimeters. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. Big enough to change everything, and enough to set everything in motion. Enough to change the course of my entire life. I didn't feel the drama of it. I didn't hear the alarms and the warnings. I simply kept going, unaware that the clock had started ticking. I didn't feel the drama, no cinematic collapse, no flashing lights. Just life, continuing as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, inside my skull, pressure was bleeding. Blood was pooling. The clock was ticking. The bleeding grew, quietly, steadily, dangerously. I didn't know it then, but this was the first time I started a journey towards a light. So I guess I was home for about 2 or 3 days and still in excruciating pain. The pain medicine did nothing for it. I was very light sensitive, noises, everything bothered me. A pillow, laying my head on a pillow, that hurt. Taking my head off of the pillow, that hurt. Any little movements of any sort were excruciating. So I remember calling my sister, and I believe it was a Friday night, let's say about 5 o'clock, and I said, I think I need to go back to the hospital. I said, this isn't right. This isn't getting better. Something's definitely wrong. Just a few days later, the bleed had grown to 9.2 millimeters. It had tripled in size. Blood, old and new, mixed together, pressing against the inside of my skull. The pressure pushed my brain slightly off center, a few millimeters at first, and then from 2 to 4 millimeters to the left. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know that my brain was shifting, that the swelling was building, that the right side of my head had become a battlefield. It was enough to concern doctors and enough to terrify those that were around me. People talk about fighting for your life as if it's a conscious act. But the truth is, sometimes your body fights while you're asleep, while you drift, while you fade in and out. And when you're out of this world that you can't quite even hold on to. My fight happened on operating tables, in hospital rooms, under bright lights, and around worried faces. I wasn't the hero of that moment. My surgeons were, my nurses were, and oddly enough, my brain and my body was. Stubbornly refusing to quit. I imagine the conversations happening around me, surgeons exchanging looks, nurses checking vital signs, and somebody telling my sister, this is getting pretty bad. I wasn't really there for any of it. Not really. My mind was drifting. It was slipping, protecting itself the only way it knew how, by shutting down. I vaguely remember a doctor coming in, older, I would say 55 to 60 years old, darker skin, like olive skin, thick Middle Eastern or thick European accent, like Eastern European accent. And as if I was to say to a friend, hey, do you want to go get a Big Mac? He looked at me and said, hey, do you mind if I cut your head open? And I know he's probably done this procedure hundreds of times, if not thousands. It's the first time anyone ever said, hey, can I cut your brain open? And it was shocking, and I did not know how to process it. I said, well, I don't know the answer to that right now. Can I have a moment to think about that? And he said, yeah, and I know I drifted off into sleep. I know I spoke with my sister and told her what they wanted to do. And I decided in a little bit of coherent times to write a list of questions in my phone that I wanted to ask the doctor next time he came in. What's the risk of this? Is it going to fix me? Am I going to need more surgeries? What is the procedure? And I know he came back in, and I believe my sister was there, and I tried to ask some of those questions, and she asked more questions, and he gave answers. I looked in the notes. They're incoherent. I can't understand what I wrote when he was responding to my questions. But I made a decision that they were going to have to do what they had to do. They had tripled in size within just a few days, and it was only growing bigger. So that decision was made, and surgery was scheduled rather quickly. And within a few hours, I was on my way to the operating room. At this point, they cut into my skull, an opening to release the pressure and drain the blood. I can imagine the cold room, the sharp air, the urgency palpable. I imagine hands moving quickly, voices steady but tense. I imagine my body lying there, unaware of the chaos it was causing. My body lying still while strangers worked to save a life they didn't know, and frankly, a life that was really no longer fully present for it. After the surgery, air had slipped into the space where the blood had been. Pneumocephalitis was the term. It almost sounds poetic, but it isn't. It was yet another complication, another reminder that nothing about this was simple. It's a sterile word for something that sounds like a horror movie, air trapped inside the skull, pressing against the brain. Post-operative pneumocephalitis is it's common, and it's intracranial air that happens following neurosurgery, often after subdural hematoma procedures. While it's usually asymptomatic and can be self-limiting, in other words, it'll fix itself eventually, large volumes greater than 5.2 cubic centimeters can cause chronic subdural hematoma recurrences. At this point, my pneumocephalitis was 6.5 cubic centimeters. So this is where the story turns even darker. The swelling increased, The the pressure grew. The midline shift worsened up to 6 millimeters. And then more symptoms came. Ones I can barely remember will never escape. My speech faltered, my left side weakened, my body betrayed me in ways I couldn't understand. Aphasia, partial paralysis, confusion. I was living inside of a storm I couldn't see. People who were there told me I looked lost, that I tried to speak, but the words came out wrong. I seemed frustrated and scared and trapped inside myself. I remember very little of it, and maybe that's mercy, but also I remember so much, and that's what scares me. The biggest thing I remember was when there was a nurse in there, and she asked a question, and I tried to answer it, and I heard the words inside my head. I heard what I said, but the words that came out were not what I said. And I tried to say it again, and then I tried to change the words, and they weren't coming out. And at this point, I knew I was inside my head, but I couldn't get outside of my head. And that was a terrifying moment that lasted several days. A parenchymal hemorrhage, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. It was 2.2 by 0.8 by 1.6 centimeters. This was blood invading the very substance of who I am. Blood where it should never have been. I was much closer to that light at this point. The swelling worsened still. The pressure, it increased even more. And the brain shifted even further left. The grooves on the inside of my brain, the sulci, began to flatten, squeezed by the swelling that had nowhere else to go. Again, I was trapped inside of a storm I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape. And this was the closest I made it to not coming back. In mid-September, the bleeding was still visible, the swelling still present. My bruised brain, battered and exhausted. It slowly, painfully slowly actually, the tide began to turn. After a couple more procedures where they stopped additional bleeds, the swelling began to ease a little bit and the pressure dropped. But the damage was done. I laid in various ICU beds for weeks on end. I know it was surgical, and then step-down surgical, and then I believe there was a brain injury center, and finally another room. I don't even remember the type of unit it was. The thing that got me through this part, thankfully I had my iPhone with me, and I had a playlist I had created just a few days ago, or just a few days prior to all of this starting. And it was a short one. It was only about 20 songs. I could hear them, but I couldn't hear them. And it was, I still have the playlist on my phone, and it was songs by a friend, Eli Madsen, such as Wicker Park, Our Song, Seen It All, Shadow, Lost It Seems, 2 Years, and a few others. A couple songs by Jamie, Keith, Carrie, and Doug, otherwise known as the Coats. Slow Ride was one of them, and Life in a Northern Town, their cover of that one. There was a couple songs by Roger Waters, Amused to Death, and Wait for Her. A song by a street musician named Morph called Driving Fast, and a few other quieter and slower songs. And I just remember having these songs on a constant rotation. And it seems like about every 2.5 hours, the list would start over. And that was the cue that the nurse was going to come in again, check my neurological condition, give me more medications, check the IVs, the whole thing they do. You're a pincushion at this point. In October, the scan showed encephalomalacia. Again, butchering the name of it, I'm sure. It's a softening of the brain tissue. A place where the brain had died and would never return. A permanent scar, invisible to the world, but etched into the architecture of who I was. It is strange to think about it. A part of my brain is gone. My damage is in the right interior formal gyrus. Gyrus, again, medical terms, I don't know. It's a critical prefrontal cortex region heavily involved in response, inhibition, cognitive control, emotional processing. It enables people to withhold potent responses, such as like stopping an action, and it's critical for attention control, social cognition, empathy, theory of mind, and these are things that I already kind of struggled with, and now it's a part of who I am. A piece of me died in that hospital bed, and yet the rest of me kept going. Doctors don't use the word miracle lightly, or at all really, but they hinted at things. Doctors told me many people don't survive one brain bleed. You had 3. You're lucky to be alive. We're surprised how well you're functioning after you've been through. I didn't feel lucky at that time. I felt confused and tired and disconnected from the world. Looking back, I understand what they meant. I walked away from something that kills people every day. I recovered from something that leaves many permanently disabled. After all these hospital stays, it was over 30 some days in the hospital. I left the hospital. My sister drove me home. And that's where the battle really kind of began, believe it or not. I had cognitive issues. I couldn't comprehend what I was trying to do. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember. I couldn't speak. I had very difficult time walking and was very unsteady. A decision was made to go into some rehab. And I was given some cognitive learning exercises. Some of them felt they were kindergarten level tests. It'd be literally things like a picture of an apple, and you had to write what it was, or picture of a house, and you had to draw the house beside it in the square. And I remember failing these tests, nearly 50 years old, and I can't pass a test that a kindergartner passes with ease. I remember also going to the hospital where the surgeries took place and spending over 8 hours with a psychological board or a psychologist board. And in that, again, they would give me a series of numbers and letters to remember, and then we would talk about something else, and they would want me to read those numbers and letters back to them as much as I remembered them. There was building blocks, literally like, kindergarten building blocks. And they would show you a picture of something. You had to build it out of these blocks, and rings on a post. And you had to move the post from largest to smallest to smartest and largest. There was so much, and they're assessing speech, and they're assessing recollection and short-term memories and long-term memories. And I remember getting the results of that test, and that was written by a full team of people. And that was one of the things they could not upload in the chart because it had to deal with mental health. And I guess they don't upload charts like that into mental health. So I got a hard copy of it, and I remember trying to read some of it, and I didn't know what it was saying. but I did know what it said was the mentality and kind of capacity of someone much younger than I was at that point. And that's when I set on a journey. I rebuilt myself from a place most never returned from. I didn't just survive, I came back. I didn't just wake up one day and suddenly understand what happened. Recovery wasn't a single moment. It was a long, uneven climb back to myself. I had to relearn things. I had to accept things. I had to face the reality that some parts of me were gone and others had to grow in their place. I don't necessarily remember the worst days. I vaguely remember the pain, the fear, and the confusion. I don't fully remember the surgery, the swelling, the paralysis. I live with the proof that it happened every day, and maybe that's enough. Maybe forgetting is its own kind of mercy, a gift from the brain that took the hit so the rest of me could keep on going. It hasn't been easy since then and since the rehab. I have fallen dozens of times, possibly 120, 130 times from late 2020 until late 2025. These falls have caused arm injuries, facial injuries, hips, legs, shoulders, chest, bruising, cuts, rashes, forward momentum, falling and hitting the pavement while walking forward, sliding along the pavement, sliding along the rugs. And it just caused outward signs to my body that I was just beaten up. I was getting more beaten up. I've suffered from fatigue. I've had times when I come home from work and I'm off for a day and I will sleep for 24 hours. Just trying to let the brain rebuild, I guess. Cognitive issues, the comprehension of certain things, I have to slow down and really think about them. Memory issues, memory loss, just losing parts of life. And I'm finding that I've always had a really good memory. And I could remember things from when I was 3 years old and 5 years old. And we'd sit around the Easter dinner table and we would discuss these things, and people would be like, how can you remember that? You were 3 years old. A lot of that is slipping away now. And I don't think it's ever going to stop. I think slowly things are going to fade away like that. The stutter, that I've had a speech impediment off and on. Some days it's really bad, other days it's okay. I have ringing in my head, not ringing in the ears, not tinnitus. I have ringing in the head constantly. I'm playing the tone now that I constantly hear. And then once in a while I get ringing in the ear, and now they sound like this together. And it is awful living in this head with this. Living alone post-traumatic brain injury, it's not a great idea. I've withdrawn from society for a long time. It hasn't been except the last 8 months or 10 months that I've really tried to go back into society. I've had friends checking on me, of course, and they've been attempting to keep me busy. There's folks that are tracking my phone, my watch. I wear the watch that's got a fall tracker on it and notifies 911. This chapter of life wasn't written by me. It was written by doctors and machines and the fragile biology of the human brain. It was written by blood and bone and pressure and chance. But the chapters that follow, well, those are mine again. And I intend to write them with the clarity and purpose that someone, and only someone, who has come so close to losing everything can truly understand. because surviving isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. Hi, Rich Andi here. Thank you for watching this podcast. It was a very personal one about my traumatic brain injury. I'm trying to do more things that interest me, and this one frankly did interest me because of how I lived through it. So I would appreciate if you would like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try to get more videos up here as time permits. It is a struggle, as you've just heard, but I'm going to write these new chapters. So until then, I'm Rich Andi, and you don't know what I'm talking about, and neither do I.